speak in support of the infrastructure bill, except the repeal of the Affordable Housing Enabling Territorial Authorities Act. And certainly it seems to us that we may have the opportunity to deal with Part 4 separately from the rest of this bill, which is very good. I'm delighted to have heard the contribution of my colleague Tau Henare. That was fantastic, and it's great to see that he has seen the error of his ways, taken on board the Labour Party's view of for the many, not the few, and I expect to see him joining us over here, so that's just wonderful to see. Now, look, I just want to talk about the submission process because along with others in this House, I was one of the members of the committee that dealt with the infrastructure bill. We received and considered 37 submissions from interested groups and individuals, and of those we heard 14 submissions, generally quite technical submissions actually, from various authorities dealing in the infrastructure area and planners and engineers and the like. And we received advice from the Treasury, the Ministry of Economic Development, the Ministry of Transport and Housing New Zealand Corporation. I'd like to take the time to acknowledge those officials for their assistance in working through this bill, which actually was a reasonably complicated bill to deal with because it was in fact addressing a number of different acts and trying to pull this together in the infrastructure bill. Now this bill of course was, as people are aware, reported back in November last year, and gee, what a lot has happened since then. We've seen ACC gutted, and that's just the start, according to the Minister. We've, of course, had the signalling of rising GST, the third Auckland Governance Bill, and I'll come back to that because clearly, as my colleague Darian Fenton said, that overlaps very strongly with what we're trying to do in this infrastructure bill. And, of course, most recently, mining in sensitive areas, so Schedule 4 areas, including the Coromandel and Great Barrier. So a lot has happened, of course, since the infrastructure bill has been reported back to the House. Now, the submissions, of course, led to a number of changes being made to the bill. Some of those, as the Minister said, quite technical, and some of them substantive, and I will address some of those changes as I go through. The bill provides effectively for a new Utilities Access Act and makes a number of amendments to several acts to remove a number of legislative barriers to infrastructure development. Now, I want to say that this is about people still, that infrastructure development is ultimately still about people. If we're looking at transport corridors, we're looking at moving people or moving freight to get it to where people need it to be, to provide the sort of jobs and economy that will support and sustain New Zealanders. Now, the bill covers 4 parts, or is in 4 parts, covering 3 main areas. First of all, changes to utilities access arrangements to transport corridors, which is, as I've learnt in hearing all the submissions on this bill, a very important mechanism for ensuring that we can upgrade and maintain our utilities. Those transport corridors are fundamentally important because they provide the opportunity to upgrade without having to damage residential or industrial infrastructure that's already in place. Secondly, the second area is around changes to the Railways Corporation Act 1981, and thirdly, the repeal of the Affordable Housing Enabling Territorial Authorities Act 2008. I'm going to come back to that one, but as I've already said, we oppose that repeal. Now, this bill essentially allows for the Minister to approve a code of practice for processes relating to access to road, rail and motorway corridors. And with the Railways Corporation changes, those are about aligning the corporate governance arrangements with equivalent provisions in the Crown Entities Act 2004. I will come back, as I've said, specifically to the affordable housing part. In relation to utilities access, I just want to note that this work was actually begun under the previous Labour government and indeed was considered by the Cabinet in 2007. And it was really because there had been inconsistent application of reasonable conditions being put on utility operators like electricity, telecommunications, water, sewage, drains and gas operators when they were seeking to exercise their right of access to roads and so on. Now, also local authorities generally as road controlling organisations, say that there's been poor quality reinstatement of roads by utility operators, and also concerns about inconsistencies between statutes, thereby creating advantages for some operators over others. So the bill in part seeks to make the legislation consistent for all utilities and provide a legislative process to give legal status to stakeholder-created code, a stakeholder-created code of the utilities companies for managing access to roads, motorways and rail corridors. Now, those inconsistencies, I just want to explain, include notification requirements prior to work commencing, the allocation of costs when installations are moved, and the criteria for setting reasonable conditions on the works by those with jurisdiction over the transport corridor, whether that be a local authority, NZTA or railways. Now, these inconsistencies can play out very badly for local communities, and I just want to give you an example from the community I'm working in, and this is from the Onehunga Community News in July 2009, and it's a very good monthly publication, and they keep a really close handle on what's going on locally. And the Business Association manager, Amanda Kinzit, was quoted in the Onehunga Community News talking about work that was happening on Princes Street in Onehunga, actually coincidentally where my office is located. And she talks about being taken unawares on a particular Friday evening in April when she saw roadworks taking place on Princes Street where there'd been no notification for the work to be carried out. After some phone calls, she discovered that Fulton Hogan was resurfacing the road. That's okay, fair enough. A number of delays led to the roadworks commencing on the 11th of May. The job was due to take 3 days, but due to inclement weather, this was not to be the case. Now, interestingly enough, in a turn of events, which in its way, and this is a quote now, in its way was fortuitous, a Vector employee, this is where it gets interesting everybody, a Vector employee was driving past the works and noticed the upheaval and recollected that Vector was due to carry out work in the area. This work was brought forward, which delayed the resurfacing of Princes Street another couple of weeks. But the good thing about that was that it did avoid the road being resurfaced and then having holes dug in it. Now apparently, and this is the bit that relates to the infrastructure bill, apparently Auckland City is supposed to have a system whereby this type of work is notified to avoid, for example, roads being dug up by successive contractors. And it appears that that system obviously had its fault. Just to finish off the story, as they went to press in July last year, the work had taken 6 weeks, not 3 days, and had been capped off with 2 burst water mains and a burst gas main. Now, this bill is about trying to stop some of those things by ensuring that the code of practice requires notification by utilities operators to each other. It means, for example, and one of the provisions that's going to be changed in the bill as a result of the Select Committee work, is that the code will require coordination of work between utilities operators, including how utilities operators deal with corridor managers as well as other utilities operators, which goes to my example of Princes Street where we had gas, water, electricity and roading all through that one street in Onehunga. So we're certainly supportive of that. Clearly those sorts of situations are not acceptable. They caused considerable loss to businesses in Princes Street and are just unacceptable in a modern society that's trying to improve infrastructure. Now, I just want to, and I'm aware I'm running out of time, but I do want to talk just briefly about the implications of changes to Auckland's governance. Because unfortunately, while this bill puts in place many good provisions around infrastructure, the fact that we are going to be facing a super city with authority away from elected representatives and in the hands of corporate bodies effectively, so-called council-controlled organisations, I think we're going to see a number of major problems with infrastructure. Everybody from business right through to community organisations, for example, is opposing the new transport agency, and clearly they are a key player. So I'll leave it there, Mr Speaker. Thank you very much.
Madam Chair.